have here with us this fantastic, lovely panel of all master chefs in their own right. And we are going to have this discussion, which is going to cover, we call this session as the proof is in the pudding, but we are going to talk about how to engage the board, what happens in the boardroom, and how to make the board work. And going back to what Rajiv was saying, how do we put together values and commitment and love and purpose back into the corporation through the board. And I have here with me Dr. Madeline Entonsit, a good friend and a global leader, and with tons and tons of board level experience herself. We have Vicky Tan. She is an icon in her own right in the Philippines, heading one of the largest corporations, conglomerates in the Philippines, Ayala Corporation, and Yo Lin, and she is head of ESG in Singapore at Prudential Assurance Company. So with this lovely panel, I'm going to sit down now, and this is how we are going to start. So, and by the way, for our lovely audience there, we will have a 15 minutes break after this session. So just in case you're wondering, so there will be a break for a yoga, stretch, or anything else that you want to do at 3:30. So this is how we are going to start. I'm going to request each panelist to spend 2-3 minutes and with this question that tell us about yourself and your organization, what you do, and how would you describe your dream board? So I'll start with Madeline. Madeline, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to join you today for your 5th summit. And I love the chef hats and the whole background here. So this is a lot of fun. So, well, as you mentioned, I am currently on several boards. In addition to, I do ESG advisory work. I've been doing ESG probably dating back for a dozen years now with my World Bank experience and my World Bank work on disaster risk management and disaster risk mitigation, and it's evolved ever since. So I'm on several boards, as you've mentioned, and I'm also nominated to join another board in January, which I'm very excited about because this is a company that's in the forefront of energy transition. So, so what does it take, and what is the dream board in my mind? So I think a dream board has 3 key features. Firstly, it's committed to sustainability and to a sustainable economy. So that means that it has a robust framework around sustainability, and the board makes it a part of the corporate culture. It means that sustainability is a key driver in the company's business model, and that every strategic decision then is made through a sustainability lens. Secondly, it's a board that walks the talk on natural capital, human capital, and social capital. So that would mean that it's a leader in transitioning to a more sustainable economy, whether that's in the alternative energy and the power space, or being committed to a circular economy, maintaining the value of resources in every aspect of its business strategy throughout the value chain. And it's an organization that's concerned with worker safety, diversity, community involvement. And thirdly, and probably most importantly, it's a board that's engaged and takes responsibility for the quality of their ESG reporting and their investor engagement. The board has to set the example so that the rest of the organization knows that the board takes this seriously. And they had better, therefore, take ESG seriously as well. So the board has to set the tone that non-financial metrics are equally important as financial metrics. The board has to ensure that the ESG metrics are produced with the same robust processes and controls and rigor as financial reporting, and it has to invest in the systems and the people to produce meaningful ESG data. So with that, I will stop there.
Thank you, Madeline. And I must also share this with everyone that Madeline is speaking from New York, and it's time 3 a.m. What's the time, Madeline, there?
2
a.m. So that's where it starts. The commitment and the purpose. And Madeline has been speaking at our conference for many years, and and that's her commitment. And 2 a.m. she's up. Thank you, Madeline, for that. So we have a deal between Madeline and me that I'm not going to ask her very convoluted, complex questions because of the time. They're just 2 a.m. So, all right. So now I'm going to move to Elle. Elle, over to you. Just tell us about yourself, what you do, your organization, and what's your dream board.
Thank you, Rajesh. Thanks for having me. So I head ESG for Prudential Singapore. And I'm responsible for driving the implementation of our ESG strategy and integrating this into our business. I also support Prudential PLC in London with our group ESG report and embedding ESG policies and metrics as part of our regional sustainability advisory group. Part of my role also entails governance and oversight on the responsible and ethical use of AI and data analytics. This is obviously an emerging trend that's happening the world over, and financial institutions particularly need to pay close attention to this. My dream board, and I think a lot of points have been shared earlier, would be one that's diverse, engaged, right, as Madeline mentioned. They also need to question and challenge respectfully, right, and appropriately. I think a dream board will also be one that leads rather than manages. They need to be prepared and well-read. Yes, board members are overworked. They have tons of reports to read, but I think they still need to be fully prepared before walking into a meeting, right? And finally, one that is collaborative, right? And is glued by a common purpose. And Rajiv also talked about that common purpose, which I think is a very interesting point.
Thank you, Elle. Vicky, over to you now.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'm Vicky Tan, or Maria Victoria Tan. I support the Chief Risk Officer and Chief Sustainability Officer of the Ayala Corporation. And in that role, I actually, together with my team, we design programs that will have to make sure that the risk-aware culture is strengthened and improved, not only at the parent company, but also across the business units. We also design the sustainability programs for the things that we can do on a group-wide basis. I also manage the annual integrated reporting and the annual integrated summit, where we have about 500 members, senior leaders, and the board of directors to be in one plenary or in one forum discussing about the trends in ESG. In addition to that, I also head the group-wide insurance optimization program. So on that note, Ayala Corporation is actually about 180 plus year old conglomerate in the Philippines. It's probably the largest and most diversified conglomerates with interest in real estate, power, telco, banking, water, probably a lot more. And more recently, we also invested into logistics, healthcare, and education. My dream board, I think Madeline and Eileen they have both mentioned what are the things that we mostly dream about having with our board members. But in addition, I would like to say that I would like to see a courageous board. The directors who will not be afraid to make changes in the way we do things or in the systems thinking, because most of the sustainability targets will require systemic transformation. And the other one is that they will be open to innovation and open to communication, not only with the internal stakeholders, but also outside. That means talking to the regulators, investors, and the wider community. So in the end, I think as part of my KRA and as also mentioned in our integrated report, we want to see an ESG competent board by 2023. Over to you, Rajesh.
Thank you. Thanks, Vicky. If I heard it right, just now you said that you have mentioned this in your report, that you want to have an ESG competent board by 2025?
2023, because
2023.
yes, because this year we also committed to be one of the leaders in sustainability within the region in the same year.
Fantastic. Well, that's something very new and interesting. Rajiv, over to you. I know you mentioned lots of things, but just your thoughts on your dream board makeup or composition.
So my dream board, my dream is a day when everybody on this planet realizes that they can make a contribution and do something about stewardship and sustainability. Not just the board, not just the senior management, not just the government, but every single individual has enough awareness and education that they know and can and will do their part. That's the dream.
All right. So, if you look at the composition of this panel, so we have two, Elle and Vicky from the corporate world. So they engage with the board, their respective boards on day-to-day basis. And then we have Madeline. So she, in her career, she has worked with boards. She works on the boards, and she's an insider in many ways as well. And also she observes the board from outside. And Rajiv, your job at Asia Stewardship Center is to really scan and look at the boards and the governance and the issues. So we are going to have a very interesting conversation here. So my next question is that, in the morning we had this poll and lots of people said that, well, a lot of spice is needed in the boardroom. So that's what people were saying. That's what everyone is saying, everyone who has spoken since morning. The question is that how do you recognize that a board does not have, it's not ESG ready? What are some of the symptoms or what are some of the signs where you know that, oh, this particular board is not ESG ready? So Madeline, what's your take on this?
I would say that there is sort of one glaring sign in a report card, if you will, and that gets back to reporting. So the company's report card, in my mind, is how seriously senior management and the report and the board take ESG. And we know that ESG reporting has a long way to go. And so it shows to me that many companies are still not ready. And so why do I say this? If a company is not producing high quality ESG data, it cannot possibly really be serious about sustainability, because no company then can manage the risks and take advantage of the opportunities that they face if they don't measure them correctly. So let me give you one example of what I mean. A recent study by the Carbon Tracker Initiative looked at 100 plus global companies in the carbon intensive sector. And they found that many companies' reports, the financial reports, were not consistent with the ESG reports. So they found that nearly 75% of ESG commentaries that were often inconsistent in the company's actual financial reporting. So the companies were using different future oil and gas price assumptions when valuing their assets and the liabilities. And the big four didn't even pay attention to that. So to me, ESG reporting is the window into the company. The quality of those reports publicly displays how seriously a company is practicing sustainability. If a company is sloppy about its ESG reporting, it doesn't matter what they're telling you about being sustainable. They're not. They may not even realize it, but they're actually advertising how ESG ready or not ready that they are by how they do their reporting.
Thank you. Thanks, Madeline. So Rajiv, looking from outside at all these company boards, what signs you pick up to say that, well, this company is not ESG ready, the board is not ESG ready?
In addition to the point that Madeline made about reporting, which I totally agree with, I think that let's take a step back. Has the board even bothered to ask management to show them proof that they have made ESG a bedrock of their business strategy itself? Have those questions been asked? Have they approved the strategy, making sure that ESG is not a side dish, as I mentioned in my comments earlier, right? And then have they paid attention to the cultural side of things? Recently, I was talking to about 100 board chairmen, and I said, raise your hand if you spend a few minutes at least in every meeting considering and talking about your company's culture. Not a single hand went up. I said, raise your hand if you do it 4 times a year. Not a single hand went up. Raise your hand if you do it twice a year. Not a single hand. Once a year, 2 hands went up out of 100. That's the attention they are paying on culture. And as I was saying earlier, what happened at Boeing, what happened at Volkswagen, et cetera, and those who are not doing anything about ESG is a matter of culture. So are you even bothered to ask those questions? That tells you whether the board is ESG ready or not in the first place.
Thank you, Rajiv. So that brings us to another question then. If the boards are not ready, and for whatever reason, whether it's a breakdown of values or purpose or whatever that might be. So what is emerging here since morning is that the boards are either not ready, or they are not prepared, or they don't care, or they don't understand the value of this. So that brings us to the next question that, okay, so who should engage the board and how they should be engaged? And whoever is going to engage the board to get them ready or get them prepared, what skills and knowledge are needed? So I'm going to our practitioners here. So starting with Elle, the question is, Elle, that in your organization, who has the prime responsibility to engage with the board on ESG matters? And in your view, what works and what does not work?
Yeah, I think from an engagement perspective, it's pretty much a shared responsibility. Of course, on ESG matters, I'm responsible for engaging with the board. And you've got your ESG and strategy heads in other corporates or any equivalent who will be responsible, right? I think the CEO is also responsible, as is the chief risk officer. So it's not so much a single person responsible for engaging with the board. I think it's a collective effort, right? What works in my personal experience, you've got quarterly meetings in a year. That's just 4 occasions to engage with them face to face, right? Outside of that, I think what works is to have individual engagements with them, whether over coffee or lunch or whatever that is, right? Because you cannot expect them to understand everything, particularly on ESG, which is such a broad topic, right? There needs to be ongoing engagement, and that works really well. In fact, one of our NEDs, she texts me at least once a week, and we share information on the side. So it's not so much whether the board is ready, right? But rather, are they willing to learn as part of this journey, because it's new for everyone. Yeah, so that's my view.
Thank you. Thanks, Elle. Vicky, what has been your experience? Who engages you have several companies, so who engages with them, and what has been your experience? What works, what doesn't work?
Okay, so probably I will share 3 things on how do we get the board on board on sustainability across the Ayala Corporation. The first one is we have this awareness program. So there is onboarding of directors. So we have this sustainability framework and philosophy and practices that are unique in the Ayala Corporation, or that have been developed over the period. And then, as I mentioned, we have this annual integrated summit on corporate governance, risk management, and sustainability. We started that in 2018, where key trends are discussed and presented to the Ayala Group Directors, Senior Management Team, and Middle Management Team. So that's an ongoing process. And then we created the Sustainability Committee, since ESG is becoming a critical part of our strategy. This committee has so far discussed deliberated and approved Ayala's climate ambition, which is to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And I think to have a baseline of where we are in that ESG thinking, we actually requested WBCSD directors to discuss the business case for sustainability at the board level. We also asked our directors to complete the ESG self-assessment tool of WBCSD, and that actually helped. There are 5 pillars that the directors have to answer a lot of questions. One of them is about purpose, risk management, stakeholder management, the integration of strategy into sustainability, and the last one is in relation to non-financial reporting. So far, these are the things that have been ongoing across the group. We started the ESG, or we did complete the ESG baseline assessment, because from there, we will be able to provide or develop a program that will help our directors to be ESG competent by 2023. So hopefully next year, we will have a full-blown program for our directors. It's a work in progress.
Thank you. I mean, that's my next question, but just because you said it and you have this 2023 program, what skills and competencies you are looking to build in your board, which will be done by 2023. Can you give us some very specific examples of skills and competencies?
I think the main challenge for the board is to transition from just financial and the impact of the ESG into the financial performance. That there is no trade-off, right? So they have to understand that anything that it's non-financial will actually impact the non-financial. So I think that's the wider concept of sustainability that they have to embrace. The other one is that innovation is key to achieve sustainability targets. So they should be ready actually to see more innovations across the group, and we want them to support those kind of discussions and initiatives. And the other one is really to understand that all of these ESG issues, they have scientific empirical data to back them up. So to be more knowledgeable on the ESG trends and issues, that will really help. I hope that answers the question. Right?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Vicky. So before I go back to Madeline and Rajiv, it's a very quick one for both of you, Elle and Vicky, that if your board becomes really ESG ready, and Vicky, especially you, that you have this program 2023, and Elle through this engagement, do you think that the board will start asking questions which will be more uncomfortable for the management, the CEO?
I believe that will happen. And I think those are the discussions that we want to have at the board level, to have those kind of questions so that we are not seeing only one particular item from one lens. We want to have that diversity of thinking also, so that we know that when we actually propose a program or a project, it is a holistic approach to that particular issue. So it will be uncomfortable, and I think we are not supposed to be here to be in our comfort zone, right? We can only achieve growth if we can find that we can get outside of that comfort zone.
Thank you. Elle?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the tough questions need to be asked as they deepen their knowledge on ESG. And as Roger mentioned earlier as well, when you're comfortable, when you don't discuss issues or raise any red flags, and this is where the real problem comes in, right? So it's critical that they start asking tough questions as well.
Thank you. So Madeline, what skills and competencies board members should have to really make a contribution and discharge their stewardship duty on ESG matters?
Well, I would say a couple of things. I would say that you need to have people that know how to navigate change. People that look at business differently from the past, because let's face it, things are going to change. Look where we are right now because of COVID. And who would have figured this is how business is going to be conducted? So you have to be really flexible and imagine the world differently, imagine business differently, and be agile and be able to implement changes. I think you need to have people have demonstrated problem solving skills and decision making skills with the traits that include insight and curiosity. Because at the end of the day, ESG is new to many, many people. And I would venture on saying mostly new to people on the boards. And so they need to get up to speed on ESG matters, the whole spectrum of ESG matters, and not just environmental, which now, of course, is taking front and center stage, but they need to be able to be understanding all of the issues. But then importantly, they have to be sufficiently fluent in the latest sustainability technology. And in particular, I think they need to be very familiar with the state-of-the-art advanced statistical techniques that investors use. Because at the end of the day, investors are making their investment decisions on based on new technology, and the board has to understand and anticipate investor actions and has to understand why investors are coming to the conclusions that they're coming to, and that way they can have with the knowledge of how investors are looking at the company, the board should be able to then be at a better competitive advantage. And then I would also agree that sustainability committees are necessary. I don't think a lot of boards have sustainability committees. And I think to your point earlier about, what companies are talking about, whether it's culture or otherwise at board meetings, I think every board meeting should also set aside time to discuss what is the business going to look like in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years, and are we on track to transition correctly to that path? If not, how do we get back on track? So I think those are the key. I think since it's a new field for many, many people, I think the skills of being able to learn new things and technical things, and having the confidence in yourself to say, you know what, I don't understand, explain it to me. Because many people are afraid to ask a question, and you have to have people that have self-confidence, not afraid to ask questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Madeline. So Rajiv, you did talk about soft sides like purpose, culture, values. What hard skills are needed for an ESG-enabled board?
So the soft is the hard. The soft is the new hard. Look, there are lots of things that I did not know about sustainability and climate science 5 years ago that I now know about. Because there are a lot of scientists out there doing the research, and all that information is available to me when I want it, thanks to Mr. Google, right? So I think in the information age, it is less about those skills and knowledge. We can acquire them. And as a director, and when I sit on a board and if I have to look at some things, I will look it up. So I don't have to be an expert. I think what I mean by saying soft is the new hard is, first of all, are you a board that wants your company to succeed by addressing the existential challenges? That requires courage, that requires guts, that requires hard, that doesn't require soft. Because those returns in the long term are going to be superior, as Paul Pullman and others have shown us, as Tata's have shown us over 153 years, but you're going to have patience. Now, you can decide whether patience is soft or hard, right? First of all, the intent. Secondly, wake up to the fact that the world is totally different. Two mega trends, Uber connectivity and Uber population, has changed the world forever. We live in a world where there are exciting opportunities for growth and daunting challenges. And you have to wake up to the fact that only those companies that thrive by addressing those challenges are going to succeed. So understand what's going on. And the skills you need, you can look up. You can get other people to explain to you. You can come up to speed. That's not the difficult part.
All right, Rajiv. And now it's to our audience. We will have some time for your questions. So if you want to ask any question, please type in the Q&A box. If you have a question for a specific panelist here, do so. Or if you have a general question, please type in. So we'll be looking at the Q&A and the box and pick up some questions before we end this session. So let's continue our chat then. So what, in my personal experience, because I also work with lots of companies and boards, and in my experience in the last several years, until 3 years, 2 years ago, when we are working with a company on any sustainability or sustainability reporting project, the interaction had changed over the years. So it used to be with somebody in the communications department, has moved up then to somebody who had a sustainability title, or a CSO, or now maybe CFO. And in the last 6 months, I have started receiving requests from boards, from CFOs, or their CSOs for the board, to engage the board and their boards. They want to have a session for the board to understand all the trends and climate change and et cetera, what's going on in sustainability, different standards. I'm seeing those requests. Now, the point that I want to make is that all that is happening because the market regulator here in Singapore, the stock exchange, is saying that the proposed guidelines, which will make the boards more responsible, including going for a training course next year, and also requiring climate reporting from next year. So all of this has triggered, I don't know whether that's values or the purpose or fear, but there's more interest from the boards. So the question here is then to Madeline, that what's the role of regulation in driving this competence in boards? And after that, Rajiv, to be over to you.
Well, I think the role of regulation varies depending on the jurisdiction. So, for example, take the US versus Europe. Europe uses regulation. Take a look at the EU taxonomy. That taxonomy is very, very prescriptive, and that may help eliminate not only the greenwashing at the corporate level, but also at the investor level. Why? Because beginning in 23, corporations have to adhere to the taxonomy and show that every one of these initiatives, projects, investments achieve one of the goals. They have these 6 goals: climate, mitigation, adaptation, protecting the water, and so on. So that's by 2023 they have to start reporting. By already this past March, some asset managers that are either in the EU or selling into the EU have to adhere to making sure that the products that they have to show that the products that they are producing are aligned with the ESG directives. And then by 22, they have to continue to evolve. They have these 6 criteria, starting with 2 and then all 6. So that is in the EU, very prescriptive, but it is also using regulation for policy purposes. In the US, totally opposite. The US, the SEC explicitly does not believe that regulation, ESG or otherwise, reporting should be used for policy purposes. So it's more about protecting shareholders. So the regulation has done a lot towards evolving. In UK is going to begin, I guess by 25 it is, that, or maybe earlier, TCFD has to be implemented. I know in Southeast Asia, a lot of countries have the reporting requirements. So it really varies across the board in terms of, how the policy and how the jurisdictions work, how the policies are formulated. Some regulation is because policies want to direct investments to ESG and to climate sensitive products. And then some say, no, that should not be the role of regulation. The other thing too, I would say is, I think we'll see more harmonization on the environmental space. And that's really where ISSB is going to begin. And I think it's going to take longer for, the S and the G. And I think that's because different norms, different social norms across the world. So I don't think there's going to ever be truly a harmonized S, version of reporting. And same thing with G, because, you have different corporate structures. And again, governance is different across the world. So I think the place it's going to begin is more around environmental, and then, little by little, the rest. But again, I think because of the different differences in policies, and the way policies are implemented and viewed, and the purpose of policies and the purpose of regulation, it's going to vary.
All right. So Rajiv, how do you address values and purpose with regulation?
Let me make one point first to be clear that regulations and rules are important. They are a part of civilized society and we need them. That said, I'm reminded of a conversation I had with a guy named Andy Fastow 5 years ago when he just came out of prison. Andy Fastow was the chief financial officer of Enron. And he created all the jugglery which got him into prison. When he got out of prison, I spent a lot of time with him because I actually thought I was going to write one of my books with him, but I didn't in the end. My publishers wouldn't let me, in New York. He said to me something that struck with me. He says he held two things in his hand. He says, I got these in the same year. This is my chief CFO of the Year award by Global Finance magazine. I got this in January, and this is my prison card. I got this in April of the same year. And then he said, I did a lot of harm without breaking any rules. I committed crimes without breaking any rules. And that I've never forgotten that conversation. And look at the history of regulation. The more the regulation, the more ingenious are the ways to go around it. So if we think that regulation is going to save the planet, with due respect, we need it. And I have the highest respect for regulators around the world. But regulation alone is not going to save this planet. We need, for this kind of change, we need something else. The second thing I want to make is we don't need to worry as much about regulation as in the past. Why? Because today there is a built-in, automatically built-in audit mechanism in the way the markets are playing out. Today's ordinary consumer and customer is much more informed and empowered than ever before in human history because everybody has a supercomputer in their pockets, right? This is not 20 years ago where we could fool people. Today's younger generations in particular are demanding businesses to behave correctly. If you don't behave correctly, and if I have a choice, I will not buy your product, I will work with my feet. So everybody is naked in today's society with the death of privacy. We don't need, everybody's on display. In the end, those companies that do the right thing by climate, by all the challenges that we're talking about, are the ones that are going to drive superior returns for shareholders. There is no conflict between shareholder centricity and what we are talking about here. So those are the points I'd like to make, which brings us back to governance needs to go less rules-based and in the boardroom and more values-based.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you, Rajiv. So now I'll go to Elle and Vicky in that order. So Elle, do you see a role for the regulation?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was just going to comment on what Rajiv talked about earlier about, you need rules and regulations. That's a given and it's a foundation. But over and above that, you also need values-based governance, which is also why we're seeing the regulator, right, looking at financial institutions, at banks and insurance sectors as well. How are we going to elevate culture and conduct within the organization that is values-based, that's not about rules and regulations, right? How do culture, values, and purpose translate into actual conduct in organizations? I think that's very critical. And this forms a very important role of the G, right? It starts with that. It starts with culture.
Vicky.
Yeah, okay. So to add to that discussion, I agree with what Rajiv and Eileen mentioned. And what I realized is that ESG is there, but the foundation is the C, which is the culture. It's the values that we have and the things that we do is based on those values. So things that we need to create or to establish and to strengthen is that the value-based governance. of course, the regulation, we need that. And I think that will provide the will have a very good playing field for everyone. The first thing that we need to do is to have that compliance mindset, but we should not stay there for long. We should be able to go beyond compliance and see what is the spirit of those regulations. Okay.
Thank you. Do we have any question from the audience, Elaine, that we want
Well, yes, we've got a few questions. I don't think we'll have time for all of them, but here's one from Anne-Marie Sidhu. Anne-Marie says, ESG is such a diverse area. Should individual directors be made experts in different areas? So governance, environmental risk, human rights, and so on. Should there be expert directors as part of the board composition, rather than just what most regulators currently require, and that is financial expertise? What does the panel think about that?
All right, so where do we go? Madeline, what's your take on this?
I think that's a good question, and I would agree. I don't think you can have an expert on every single topic, because that would be a rather unruly board. But I think you maybe, the soft side and the harder side, right? So I am a big believer that, boards and certainly senior management should have chief scientist officers. But I think it's also true that you also need people that are, what is an expert, by the way? So you need to have people that have familiarity and expertise in, all of the HR kind of things, right? The human resources and the so-called human capital. I mean, that's a very big one. And I'm a little bit concerned because this whole, transitioning to a net zero by 2050, 2030, 35, that's taken on sort of a whole life in and of itself, which is important, obviously. But I believe, to the cost and the detriment of the the S and the G. So everybody's everybody's moving to one side of the ship, and everybody's looking at that. So the environmental, and I think losing sight of the other two aspects of ESG. So yes, I think that would make a lot of sense to have people having different expertise, not just focusing on the environmental, as important as it is, but on the other side as well. And keep in mind, no one could tell you more about culture and the need for governance than I can, because I had a front row seat at Lehman Brothers bankruptcy. And if you don't know the whole story, read the 2,200 page examiner's report. And I wrote an article as an op-ed in the New York Times, I guess, in the 10-year anniversary of 2018, and said it was just a complete failure of governance. And at the end of the day, everybody is exposed. Everybody has that short an option to the CEO who's long that option, that can, I get the upside if I do well, and if I don't, well, then, the company pays for it anyway. So, yeah, I mean, governance is so important. So to me, I think that makes sense.
Elle, do you think it will help to have specialist experts, directors on the board?
Yes and no. Yes, because it's such a broad topic, and it's good if you carve it out into bite-sized pieces for them to digest. No, because some of the board members have tenures, and so then what happens when they leave, right? Do you then start training a new board member and get that person to become an expert? So I think, it's a combination of, yeah, it has its upsides, and no, there are some downsides to it. But yeah, I think everyone should still have a broad understanding of ESG in its entirety.
Okay, so we still have a couple of minutes, not more. We are slightly behind our schedule since morning. So is there any burning question, Elaine, that we must pose to this panel that you have from the audience?
Well, I think we can take briefly a question from Yulia Damayanti, who asks, look, fast forwarding, boards, they've got the information, they know what to do, ESG, sustainability, they understand it's imperative, but they see it differently. They have different views on how the organization needs to go about carrying out the strategy. Who's responsible to actually get the board of directors on the same page?
Rajiv.
So this is where I go back to what I said earlier. The first and foremost responsibility of the board is to make sure they find the right CEO who can drive growth through ESG and make ESG the main course and not the side dish, right? And then the board has to engage with management together in multiple sessions to understand what the purpose of the organization, the why of the organization, and the strategy with which it will achieve that purpose. Once that part is done jointly, then the problem of getting the board on the same page goes away. So I work with a lot of companies around the world where my job is to bring management and boards on the same page. And what do we make them do? They say, I typically will give everybody do you understand? I give everybody a piece of paper and say, in 40 words or less, give us the company's strategy. And if there are 20 people in the boardroom, I get 20 different versions. Then we put them through an exercise, and by the end of the day, they are all on the same page. So that process, you should not need consultants for. That's the primary responsibility of board and management to do together, and let it take as much time as it takes, because that will save you tons of time later. So this, going back to your earlier question, whose responsibility is it to engage the board? With due respect, I want to challenge that a little bit and say, it is first of all the chairman's responsibility to find that the right management is in place that has the will and the skills to drive growth through ESG. And then it is the board and the chairman and the CEO's responsibility to bring the two bodies, the management team and the board, together and stay together. And that is what doesn't get done, in my opinion. Keeps me employed, but that's okay.
All right. So it's the last question to each of the panelists. The answer is just yes or no. So you choose your answer. So I'll start with Madeline. So this is the question: that should the board compensation be linked with ESG targets?
No.
Madeline says no. Rajiv?
No.
The board.
The board?
Yes, the board's compensation is what you asked for, and my answer is no.
All right. It should not be linked with ESG targets, you're saying?
No,
Okay.
not the board's compensation.
Right. Elle?
No.
Vicky?
I think the same answer, no.
All right. So isn't, Elaine, a lot of these rating agencies asking this question, whether the board compensation is linked with ESG targets or not? And there are points for that, saying yes, and no points for saying no. Well, I will leave it there at that. So, but that was interesting to hear from this panel that it's leaving more questions now, after this panel discussion, that if their compensation does not depend on ESG targets, then what is there to drive them? Just values and purpose and culture. So we are going back to and maybe self-enlightenment and those kinds of things. So is that what we are saying before we end?
I think at the end of the day, the board's responsibility is to tie senior management's compensation, the CEO's compensation to ESG. And I think, boards need to realize, there's significant costs to the company by not being ESG aware. I mean, we can just take a look at several examples where financial risks have become, non-financial risks have become financial risks. You can cite them. Facebook, Kraft, Lehman Brothers, PSE&G. I mean, the list is long. Deutsche Bank now. So I think, ultimately that's the way that they need to think about the company. There are huge costs of externalities and you just take one quick second, WWF, as well as the Impact Weighted Accounts Initiative out of Harvard, both have these, using big data technology now, look at the cost of externalities on a company and the company's externalities. And the Harvard study looked at 1,700 companies using 2018 data, and they found that when you measure and then take into account the cost of these externalities, companies' actual profits are 15% of the company's profits were more than wiped out. And you have to realize that these in WWF shows how the cost of the externalities, of course, can become liabilities. And so that's a whole different thing. And of course, you know, as a board director, you have liabilities, a lot of liabilities. So that's how they can be motivated.
Thank you, Madeline. So your answer has really helped because a lot of people were wondering that why everyone is saying no. So that was a very good justification. So we need another session to continue this discussion. So we have to stop here now. But it has been absolutely fantastic. To look to me that what we need in the boardroom is values, culture, purpose, and it is the purpose which has gone wrong. If we get the purpose right, everyone can be on the same page, and a lot of broken things can be fixed. So that's the key message that I'm taking for this session.